This story did not receive a lot of national attention, but it should have. Back in 2017, there was a black undercover police officer protesting at a Black Lives Matter demonstration. Well, he was there as an undercover cop. He wasn't there committing any acts of violence. He was not looting. He did not destroy any property. He did none of that. He was there simply as a protester, spying on other protesters. That was his job. He happens to be an African-American male detective named Luther Hall. Mr. Hall was there to catch other criminals. See, the whole reason why you have an undercover cop in any situation is because you're there to root out or to observe criminals. Well, he found some criminals and they were other police officers. 4 cops ended up being charged with beating this man senseless because, according to them, they thought he was a protester. They didn't think he did anything illegal. They just thought he was a protester. Well, let's fast forward. A trial did happen. They were indicted by the federal government. Mistrials took place for some. One guy actually pleaded guilty. One cop said, listen, I did that. I'm pleading guilty. Let's get this over with. And a conviction did happen recently. St. Louis Metropolitan Police officers Stephen Court and Christopher Myers were found not guilty of deprivation of rights under the color of law, which they were charged with in connection to the beating of Detective Luther Hall, who had been posing undercover as a protester. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reports that while jurors were not able to return a guilty verdict on Boone, they were able to make a decision to related charges against Myers, who was accused. They were not able to make a decision related charges against Myers, who was accused of tampering with evidence. So one cop literally broke his phone. They couldn't make a conclusion on that. But there's one person that got found guilty. And here's some of that background to the story.
3 police officers are on trial in St. Louis accused of brutally beating one of their own. In September of 2017, Detective Luther Hall was working undercover at a protest that erupted after a local police officer was found not guilty of murdering a black man that he shot after a car chase. So while at the demonstration, Hall was severely beaten by a group of police officers who say that they thought he was a protester.
Think about the irony here. He's undercover because his supervisor said, you need to be with these protesters who commit crimes. And you need to observe and report what crimes are being committed. But he, in fact, uncovered the real criminals, the police officers who were at the protest. Dustin Boone was charged in this beating as well. And his case ended in a mistrial initially, and then the prosecutors tried it again. After being tried again, Boone was found guilty of the felony civil rights charge and could face up to 10 years at sentencing. Let's bring up all of the cops who were involved in the initial beating and got charged, okay? You see that? They're all white, okay? Here's the cop that got beat up who was undercover. That's him. Lip has stitches, face jacked up, arms, legs. He was assaulted, he was beaten. And here's why we know about this story. Here's why the feds charged the individuals who decided to become criminals that night against this undercover cop, because he's an undercover cop. That's why we know about it today. How many times do you think that happened to Black Lives Matter protesters and we never heard about it? The federal government never charged anybody and no one else got involved. 1.9% of Black Lives Matter protesters, they have claimed that they have actually been assaulted unlawfully by police officers. Only 1% of cops said that they were assaulted by anybody. 1% at these protests. Literally more protesters claim they've been assaulted by cops than the other way around. And there are way more protesters than police officers at these events. Adrienne, you're an attorney. You see this, you're part of the legal justice system. Your thoughts?
Well, I would definitely like to say that what makes these cases kind of unique, where you have an officer who was beaten by another officer while he's undercover, is that one of the reasons we find out a lot about it and we see the cases go as far as they do is because of workman's comp. This is an on-the-job injury for that detective in particular. And hey, the office that he works for has to submit all of his claims and information. And so thus they have to, in the event that they want to be reimbursed, they gotta pursue these claims. So they actually have to pursue the prosecutions at the same time. And fortunately, in this case, the federal government stepped in to prosecute these officers because it was clear that they were not going to get the fair pursuit of justice here if it was done at the local level. St. Louis has some serious problems. The city's top prosecutor, a Black woman who was brought into office recently, what she did is she had to include a list of officers who cannot testify because they are so shady. They are known as being untrustworthy. So I think that list is about at 75 names up to September 2020.
Wow.
The fact is that there is so much oppression that goes on when it comes to interracial violence from the police and when it comes to the citizens there in St. Louis, and that it has not been rectified, that you cannot even trust the police department. And this is another sign of that ill.
You make a great point about this being an on-the-job injury. You're right, he has to file for his insurance. There's a paper trail for why it happened. The city eventually settled with him about 4 or 5 months ago. They gave him $5 million in a settlement, okay? But even with all of that and the compelling evidence, still, the vast majority of these police officers, they did not get convicted. It was a mistrial. And the one who pleaded, he testified. I mean, he said, listen, this is what happened. You have another cop who destroyed his cell phone. He didn't get convicted. This one individual gets convicted. And once again, even when there's a symbol of justice, even when you see justice kind of happen, it still turns much slower for police officers than a regular citizen.
Yep, absolutely. And something I'd love to go back to is looking at kind of the stats on how officers are treating Black citizens there in St. Louis. In Missouri alone, Black drivers are 91% times more likely, 91% more likely than white drivers to be pulled over. And Black male drivers, they're nearly twice the rate of white male drivers to have their vehicles searched. Also, Black people are more than 3 times as likely to experience use of force from the department's officers compared to white people when it comes to St. Louis Police Department. They have a sincere problem here where you have too many cops who are looking for an opportunity to crush some skulls, so to speak. And in this instance, they crushed the wrong skull, but at the same time, they are not facing consequences. Unfortunately, because you do have people in that St. Louis area who still are unwilling to convict a white cop for engaging in brutality when it is clear and present.
Yeah. This detective, he's $5 million richer because of his pain and suffering. When he testified, he barely could get through his testimony because he was crying profusely. This definitely traumatized him extensively. And I just hope he becomes an advocate for Black Lives Matter rather than an undercover officer spying on them. Because on that day, he caught the real criminals who were at that protest, and they happened to be his own colleagues.